Okay, I think we're ready to start. Thanks for attending the session. I know I'm competing with some interesting other topics. What I want to talk about today is, I think, somewhat of a controversial topic. It's something I kept thinking about this year, and we also heard it like just 2 talks ago, also from Marco, who was saying that are we trying to fit the square into the round? Let's see if that works, and so on. So take everything I say today with a grain of salt, but think of it as a trigger for further discussions. I will start with a little intro about myself. Not because I like to talk about myself in particular, but because it's actually relevant for the discussion. So basically, next year it'll be like a decade since I first had contact with SAP Technologies. And out of that, I would assume I've done about 8 years of ABAP development. And in the last two years, I've refocused more on cloud-native development. Last 1 year, I've really went in depth with Java and UI5 development on a Cloud Foundry stack. But what I found to be most disruptive is not the technology itself, but the way you work with these technologies, what practices you have, and what tools you use, and how the team gets to think differently about the product as a result. And I want to share with you these thoughts today. So in the end, you can, if you want to see the slides, you can look on Twitter. I'll post them over there. And I will start with some history. So like I said, we kept employing practices like continuous integration. Just quick raise of hands, who's been at Otmar's talk before? Do I have to do another intro to? Do I have to do another intro to continuous integration? No, I won't do it. So we've used these practices, and I couldn't help but thinking, what could you carry over on an ABAP stack, and what could you apply? So I'm quite a Devops fan lately, and I did a talk in Timișoara at an Insight Track half a year ago where I went in depth into what DevOps means for me. It's like having responsible teams, like building quality into the product and automating everything. But I won't make it about DevOps today. I just want to say one thing. There's this cool book that measures organizations and how they perform, and it turns out that if you have a high-performing organization, they are able to deliver software both faster, and they do it actually with higher quality. So those are not metrics that go against each other. If you have the right practices, you are able to do them both at the same time. So I kept on thinking, what can we use out of these practices, and how can we bring those in the ABAP world? And I kept researching, and then throughout the year, there was a lot of discussion ongoing in the community, SAP community. I'm curious, did any one of you read this blog on ABAP, the special snowflake? You know it? You can look it up. It's on the SCN. It basically talks about how ABAP is very special from basically every perspective, and how you could instead also try to be open towards the community and try to use some of the knowledge that all the other developers outside of ABAP have, basically open source if you want, and the kind of culture that we have in ABAP development in general. And I've also seen that there have been posts and thoughts about implementing CI practices in an ABAP development shop like over there. These are actually not that new, the posts. And what I find quite cool is that actually change might be even closer than we might expect. There's a task force from DSAG that specifically deals with how you can apply DevOps practices in an ABAP landscape. And you have the slides linked below, but what you will see here, for example, and I'll go into details in a minute, but you see a landscape where you have your typical dev, test, prod environment, and you have these dedicated development systems, and they are all interconnected with some kind of Git repository in the middle. So this is not yet for productive use, neither is anything that I'm going to be talking about today, but it's just to open your eyes and to start a discussion about what could or could not be possible on an ABAP stack. So now you might be thinking, oh wait, what the hell is this guy talking about? What is the problem? What are the problems that he's referring to? So I will take these DevOps principles one at a time. The first one, we said we want to deliver fast, because delivering fast is really not nice to have anymore today. You have to, if you want to be competitive, you have to be able to do that, and you have to do it in quick iterations and automated. And instead, what I found in my years doing ABAP development is that you have a sluggish, a slow process through which you bring development through the landscape. Then you have many developers working on one common ABAP environment, where all of a sudden you want to test something and someone else broke some data dictionary and you're not able to test your application. So you have these unstable environments. You can't release your transports because someone forgot to release their tasks or whatever. I hope that everyone or most of you resonate with that. Then you have the idea of responsible teams and being able to deliver software in a reliable manner. And instead, what I have often found is a mentality where the developers develop the application and the operators operate the application. They're on the production, and then what happens is that the development team writes an endless documentation for the operations team, throws the source code over the fence together with the documentation and says, please handle it. And if things go wrong in production, then the finger pointing starts. Where's the problem? So this is, in a sense, you could sum it up as silo thinking, because you have developers and you have operations, they don't collaborate. Like Otmar also mentioned, the collective ownership. Everyone is responsible for the delivery in the end. And then there's also the idea of quality. You want to be able to deliver high quality software, and you get feedback from your customer as soon as possible. And instead, we also often have these waterfall development methodologies with really long-lasting test phases where you cannot transport anything into test because the customer is there to test. And my impression is this is caused because quality is not part of the development phase. When you develop, we fail to think about quality. We just build the application and let the customer or the tester in the end make sure that it has the right quality. While instead, you could build automated tests while you do the development. So here's where the buzzword test-driven development, for example, makes sense. So I've thought about it, what might be the actual cause or causes of this. I know it's a subjective interpretation. As I said, it's just meant to be a discussion starter. We have all these manual activities, transport problems, finger pointing, unstable environments, silo thinking. And in my opinion, these problems stand on two pillars. One is maybe the technical infrastructure that comes with some limitations, and the other is the culture that we've built, which we keep on reusing in the same way. And then I thought about how you could solve some of these problems? What would be necessary? When I talk about infrastructure, if you think about a NetWeaver ABAP system, and if you know how other languages work, in other languages you have a development environment, right? You have IntelliJ or whatever. In the meantime, we also have ABAP in Eclipse. That's true. But IDE, then you have source code repository, then you have a compiler, a build server, the runtime. In other platforms, these are completely different things. For an ABAP server, it's all in there, all in one central server. So the implications of these, it might be, I'm quite sure that this is also what causes some of these problems that we have. And the culture, for me, it was too fuzzy to start discussing about what culture is, but I found once again some interesting research in this book that said you can't force culture to be changed, but you can start doing the right things, doing the right practices, and culture will change as a result. So if you want to start doing the right things, you at least need to have the right tools. And I've put here some nice icons. I'm not sure if you can see them from behind. One is ABAP Kit, which some guys in the community think it's maybe the best thing that happened to ABAP in the last 10 years. You have Jenkins that Otmar talked about. And then you have stuff like Cucumber and Nightwatch, which I actually borrowed from the S4 SDK for my demo, which I'll show, and Docker as well. So I thought about all of this. I took a look at what the task force at the SAG were thinking about, and I tried to put it in practice with a big annotation that it's not meant for productive use, but it's meant to just get you thinking about it. So if you have, assuming you put your dev environment on a side and you just stick with test and prod, connected with your typical transport management system, and instead you give every ABAP developer his own ABAP development system. Right now, you're not able to spin up an ABAP instance on the fly, but this might change. For example, if we have ABAP on SAP Cloud Platform, this solution might be even closer than we think. We might be able to spin up an instance fast, just do our local development over there, and via ABAP Git, push our changes into a central Git repository. You obviously have multiple ABAP developers working in parallel. You could even say, I'll share this one instance with 2 or 3 other guys that work on the same task with me. But then you mitigate the chances of having a merge conflict. But anyway, you'll be able to do it if you use Git. And then what you have is you use one of these nice little Jenkins pipelines, which whenever you push to Git, it can be configured to start, execute some unit tests on your ABAP code, even deploy your code to a test environment, and then you can even run some tests right on the user interface. I'm assuming we are building Fiori UIs, because that's what we do now. We have OData services and Fiori UIs on top. And in order to bring Fiori UIs into the picture, you might have some UI5 team with their own Git repository, maybe a little pipeline themselves to build the source codes, to minimize it, lint it, and so on, and then merge it into the same repository. That's one way of doing it. It's not the only way, of course, but it's just what came into my mind. And I want to show it right now. Maybe I can just pause and ask if there are any questions right away before I start.
Perhaps not a question, but a comment. I think culture and infrastructure are certainly very, very important aspects or obstacles or whatever you want to call them. But I also think that there might be, there might be more fundamental problems. Speaking of Fiori applications, for instance, they access the data via OData services, and something has to be done, has to be there, for instance, in the back end in order for the application to work properly. And I think when you do it in an agile way, you have to be able to break the product down into user stories, which support an agile sort of developing them. And this might be true for front ends, might be workable, but the back end is to some extent, as a monolith, very, very complex. And it might very well be that it takes a lot of sprints, a couple of sprints, for some back-end functionality to be implemented. And I think this might also be preventing this sort of, agile approach and a CI/CD approach.
Okay. All right. So I have a demo from my perspective. I just reuse ABAP Kit, and then what binds, the glue that binds everything together in the end is the pipeline. And here is where the beauty of the community and of open source can come into play. I'll show it right away, but I was able to reuse existing steps that are either provided by SAP in the form of this pipeline library, Piper library, or we have Christian Lechner, who I'm sure many of you know, that already published some basic steps, for example, for executing unit tests using ATC in an ABAP environment. Or I also borrowed, like I said, the S4 SDK Docker image to run my end-to-end tests. And this is where you get to profit from open source the best. So I have the demo as videos on YouTube if you want to look into it afterwards. I'll try to just show the same thing right now. So I have here my local dev environment. I closed my slides. Great. My local dev environment is just a demo sample UI5 application. I click on it, I see two fields, and I just have a filter on it. Nothing spectacular. I have the same thing in that so-called test environment. It doesn't matter, it works just as well. And I have the same things connected. These are the same two systems, just shown in ABAP in Eclipse. Not sure if you can read it. Yeah, never mind. It's just a data provider class for a NetWeaver gateway backend, where I have some dummy data hard-coded and I apply some filters. And the idea is, what I just want to show you is that I'm now on my local development environment, and I have ABAP Git as a Git client running in here. Let's see how good the network works. And you can just see in my Git repository, what I have is my backend, so to say, in a very simplified manner. So I have my data and the model of my OData service, my package, and this here is all of this is the UI5 content. And this is, I don't know if you can read it. This is published on Bitbucket as a repository. I already have it here. So on Bitbucket under source, I have the same thing that I've published using ABAP Kit. And so obviously I don't think I have to. All right, can you read it in the back or? Okay, now it's freezing. Okay, so I'll just, maybe if you weren't here last year when Lars was presenting ABAP Kit, I'll just show you how it works. I just made a change in one of the classes, and I immediately can push it to a repository. And then I have over here my test environment, let's say, where I have exactly the same thing replicated, my UI5 and my ABAP source code. I can start the same ABAP Git transaction just to pull those changes. So you see it already refreshed the repository, and I can pull it on my test system. I still have to choose the same old transport request in this case. And I have the changes replicated over here in test. Okay, so this is ABAP Git, right? But then what comes into play, for example, what I'm most of the time lacking is just this test-driven development mentality. And the most basic thing you can do is write unit tests. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to do that. And I've done so, and you can just take the source code and say, run as ABAP unit test. And then you'll see inside there's a unit test search by first name correctly. All is nice and well. Now I want to do a more complex test on the user interface. And then this is where these tools like Cucumber and Nightwatch come into play. I have these Cucumber feature files. Can you read it? I'll do it like this. Where actually the business department would come and define some core business scenarios. And I'd say my first scenario is to check whether the basic app functionality is still up and running. And how I check it is I write these natural language sentences, but with a when, then, given when, then structure. When I log on using Fiori Launchpad, then I start the application, I go to the employee overview, then at least one employee is visible. And then some of the developers will go and implement these tests. The good thing is that every one of these steps can then be reused later. If I want to rewrite the test or reuse one step in another test. And then in the end, I just go and I just say, run my end-to-end tests. And what it does is it opens my system, it logs on the Fiori Launchpad, just like I said. Then it goes on at the URL where the UI5 app is located. It clicks on that button, it filters by some stuff, filters by some other stuff, and then it says, I searched by ICT and I got one entry. I searched by O and I got 2 entries. All tests have passed. So what I got through this is an automated way to make sure that my core scenarios are still working. I just need a way to bind it all together into something that runs all the time. And this is where the Jenkins pipeline comes into play. So over here I have the same repository cloned locally. Under source, I have my source files from the ABAP system. Under E2E, I have the end-to-end tests. And under test, I have the unit test configuration from Christian's script. And if we look at the Jenkins file, this is where what also Otmar was mentioning, this is where you get to define the steps. And this is where you get to reuse what the community already built, and it makes it quite easy. You just say, I want to reuse the Piper library and initialize everything. I want to execute unit tests. where I just reference something directly from GitHub with some configuration. Then I want to deploy to the test environment. This one actually required some hacking to do on the test environment to make sure that I just call some endpoint and the test environment pulls the latest changes from the Git repository locally. And then what I'm able to do is run these end-to-end tests that I just showed you directly on the test environment. So the result is a developer finishes his task, pushes to Git, the pipeline is triggered, and all these steps run. My changes are in the test environment, and the basic scenarios hopefully still work. So this is what a pipeline looks like after it has run. If you look at the unit tests, it will just tell you what it executed. In the backend, it's going to be the same unit test that I just showed you. Deploy to test environment, and then running of the end-to-end tests is the same output that I just showed you in my console ago. So the two scenarios with given, when, then, everything passed, all good. And the good thing is I can use this as a regression test. So if I go to, let's say I go to my test system, my development system, I have a test case that searches for the name John, or actually for the letter O. I'll just take out the letter O. Of course, this is just I'm on the test system. This is why you shouldn't be able to change the test system. I did a change. I do a refresh. Let's call this breaking change. I did something wrong. Now I just go in my Jenkins server and just say start the build. You could configure it, of course, for the build process to start as soon as you committed something. The initialization just pulls some dependencies, does an npm install. Now I just have to say something while this is running. So like I said, take everything I say now with a grain of salt. This is an overly simplified use case, but it's just to try to imagine what things might look like if the right prerequisites are there. So the unit tests were executed. My source code was deployed to the test environment. And what is it doing? It's now logged on to Launchpad, started the application. It starts. Okay, see, we have a red build because it searched by O, expected 2 entries, but only found 1. And the cool thing here is you can actually get a screenshot of how the application looked like on the build server. The application searched by O and only found 1. I wonder why, right? So that's actually the main thing I wanted to show you. I mean, let me just go back to my slides. The main idea, the main takeaway would be understand that there are these fundamental principles. If you want to be doing something like DevOps or agile development, start from there. Then find the right tools to enable you. Like I said, this is not for productive use, but keep an eye open. There are people in the community dealing with this sort of thing right now as we speak. Keep in mind that ABAP is now available on the SAP Cloud Platform. This might open new possibilities. And just stay tuned for more updates. Okay? Any questions? Then thanks for your attention. Sherban has an application where you can collect feedback. So if you want to, you can enter that, and then in the digital lounge you'll be able to see your feedback with sentiment analysis and so on. And if you've missed his session, then you can see the recording. It was the first one this morning. So thanks for your attention. Have a nice day.